The sky over Koros V blazed crimson, torn by the streaks of laser fire and the constant explosions that had become the planet's heartbeat. Sergeant Alex Renner crouched behind a fallen pillar, the vibration of his pulse rifle against his chest the only steady thing in a world coming apart. Black smoke billowed from the Coalition command post half a kilometer behind him, and the screams of both soldiers and civilians created a hellish symphony that had long ago stopped registering as anything but background noise. "Falcon Squad, status report," crackled Captain Eva Rostova's voice through his comm unit. Her tone was as cold and precise as ever, untouched by the chaos erupting around them. "Beta quadrant mostly clear, ma'am," Renner replied, scanning the burning residential district ahead of him. "Getting the last civilians to transport pad 4. ETA 7 minutes. Make it 5, Sergeant." Orbital defense grid just went down. The Koranian dreadnoughts are moving into position. This entire continent will be glass in 20 minutes. Renner swallowed hard. "Copy that. 5 minutes." He signaled to the 4 soldiers of his squad and the huddle of terrified human colonists behind them. "Double time, people. Move." As the ragged group of survivors rushed forward through the smoke, Renner took point, his weathered face set in grim determination. 10 years in Coalition Special Forces had left him with more scars than he cared to count and a hollow ache where idealism used to live. This war with the Koranians had consumed nearly half his life, an endless, grinding conflict between humanity and the insectoid empire that showed no signs of resolution. Private Cooper, the youngest of his squad at barely 20, fell in beside him. "Another glorious day, saving humanity, Sarge?" Despite the attempted humor, the tremor in the kid's voice was unmistakable. Renner didn't respond. He'd stopped believing in glory around the same time he'd watched his hometown on New Eden turn to ash by Koranian orbital bombardment. 5 years ago now. Not that the Coalition High Command was any better. He'd seen enough to know that both sides in this war had blood-soaked hands reaching for the stars. They rounded a corner into what had once been a pleasant town square, now a landscape of broken concrete and twisted metal. A sudden movement caught Renner's eye, a Koranian scout ship screaming overhead, so low that debris scattered in its wake. "Down," he bellowed, pushing Cooper and the nearest civilians to the ground just as the ship strafed the area with plasma fire. The ground shook with the impact, and Renner felt the heat of the blast wash over him like an angry tide. When he raised his head, Private Mills was down, a smoking hole where his chest had been. 2 civilians hadn't made it either. Renner cursed, knowing there was no time to mourn, and hauled himself to his feet. "Keep moving," he ordered, the practiced detachment in his voice belying the sick feeling in his gut. Another day, another retreat, more lives lost in a war that had long since lost any meaning beyond survival. As they neared the evacuation point, the desperate surge of humanity became a choking flood. Coalition gunships provided cover fire, their cannons hammering at incoming Koranian fighters with a thunderous rhythm that shook the air itself. Frightened faces turned toward Renner and his squad, looking for reassurance he couldn't honestly give. And then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong amidst the cacophony of battle, a high, keening wail that sliced through his combat-numbed senses like a knife. Renner froze, cocking his head to pinpoint the source. "Sergeant," Private Dawson questioned, eyes darting between Renner and the evacuation point ahead. "Last shuttle leaves in 3 minutes, sir." "Captain's orders." The cry came again, weaker this time, from a half-collapsed structure to their left. A building Renner recognized as part of the Koranian residential sector, where those few aliens permitted to live among humans as diplomats, researchers, or laborers had been housed before the invasion. "Get these people to the shuttle," Renner ordered abruptly. Cooper stared at him in disbelief. "But what about?" "That's an order, Private." Renner's voice left no room for argument. "Tell Captain Rostova I'm checking for stragglers. I'll be on the shuttle." Without waiting for acknowledgement, he veered away from the group, ignoring Dawson's protests. The cry was fainter now, but unmistakable to someone who'd spent years fighting on a dozen worlds. It was the sound of a child, Not human, but still a child. The building's entrance was partially blocked by debris. Renner shouldered his way through, rifle at the ready, every sense alert for an ambush. The interior was dark, choked with dust and smoke that made his eyes water. Emergency lighting cast eerie blue shadows across what had once been a comfortable living space, now reduced to ruins. "Hello," he called, then cursed himself for the foolishness. If there were adult Kyranians here, he'd just announce his presence to the enemy. But something, perhaps the last shred of humanity that war hadn't managed to burn out of him, propelled him forward. The crying led him to what might have been a sleeping chamber. Two adult Kyranian bodies lay on the floor, their chitinous exoskeletons shattered by explosive decompression when part of the roof had been blown away. Their iridescent carapaces, normally vibrant with blues and greens, were dulled in death. They wore civilian clothes, not military armor, just residents caught in the crossfire, like millions of others. And between them, trembling violently, was a Kyranian child, barely the size of a human toddler, its exoskeleton still soft and translucent. It keened in distress, six-fingered hands clutching at the garment of one of the dead adults. Its parent, Renner realized with a sickening lurch. His comm unit crackled. "Sergeant Renner, what the hell is your position? Shuttle preparing for departure. Final boarding in 90 seconds. The child's large, compound eyes, a swirl of amber and gold, fixed on Renner. There was no way to read Kyranian expressions, but the trembling intensified. It recognized him as human, as the enemy. In that moment, Renner saw himself reflected in those alien eyes, not as a defender of humanity, but as a monster from a child's nightmares. And something deep inside him, something he thought long dead, stirred painfully. "Sergeant Renner, respond immediately." Captain Rostova's voice had taken on the edge that promised court-martial or worse. Time slowed to a crawl. Coalition regulations regarding enemy civilians were explicit. No aid, no quarter, no exceptions. The doctrine was one of complete separation. The Kyranians were not just the enemy, but fundamentally other, their hive-like society and insect biology proving they could never coexist with humans. That was the narrative that had fueled a generation of war. But staring at this child, Renner could only see a terrified orphan. "Sir," Cooper's voice suddenly came through the comm. "Shuttle pilot says 30 seconds to departure. Non-negotiable." The child made another sound, lower this time, almost a whimper. One tiny hand reached out, not toward Renner, but toward the empty air, a gesture so nakedly helpless that it shattered something inside him. "Fuck it," Renner muttered, slinging his rifle and moving forward in a crouch. The child recoiled, but had nowhere to go. "It's okay," he said softly, knowing the words meant nothing to the alien child, but hoping somehow the tone would translate. "I'm not going to hurt you." With movements as gentle as he could manage, Renner scooped up the small form. It was lighter than he expected, and its body temperature was several degrees cooler than a human's. It went rigid in his arms, but didn't struggle. "Renner, this is your final warning." Rostova's voice cut through again. "On my way," he interrupted, already moving toward the exit, cradling the Kyranian child against his tactical vest. "Got a straggler." He didn't specify what kind of straggler. There would be time for court-martials later if they survived. The dash back to the evacuation point was a blur of adrenaline and desperation. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air around him as Kyranian ground forces pushed into the district. The final shuttle's engines were already cycling to launch position, its ramp partially raised. "Hold!" Renner shouted, sprinting the last 100 meters with everything he had left. A coalition Marine at the ramp's edge spotted him and signaled to the pilot. "Move your ass, Sergeant," the Marine yelled. Renner hurled himself through the narrowing gap, landing hard on the shuttle deck with the alien child clutched protectively to his chest. For a moment, there was only the sound of his ragged breathing and the whine of the engines powering up. Then, silence fell over the crowded shuttle like a shroud. Renner looked up to see dozens of eyes fixed on him, or rather on what he carried. The Kyranian child had begun to tremble again, its small limbs pulling in tight against its body in a defensive posture. "What the actual fuck, Sergeant?" It was Dawson who broke the silence, her rifle already half raised. "Stand down," Renner ordered, struggling to his feet while keeping the child secure. "That's a goddamn bug," someone in the crowd of evacuees said, voice thick with disgust and fear. "It's a child," Renner countered, his voice slicing through the rising murmurs. "A non-combatant civilian under Article 5.3 of Coalition Humanitarian Protocols." Captain Rostova pushed through the crowd, her face a mask of cold fury. "Sergeant Renner, have you lost your mind? That is an enemy alien. Jettison it immediately." The shuttle lurched as it lifted off, the view through the portholes showing Koros V's surface already beginning to burn as the Koranian. Bombardment intensified. Renner stood his ground, meeting Rostova's glacial stare. "With respect, Captain, Article 5.3 specifically states that enemy non-combatant miners are to be treated according to basic humanitarian principles when captured or surrendered. This child is now under coalition protection." "That article was written for human conflicts, not interspecies war," Rostova spat. "That thing is Koranian. Its adults would eviscerate you without a second thought." "Maybe," Renner acknowledged. "But it can't, and we're supposed to be better than them, aren't we? Isn't that the point?" A tense standoff ensued, broken only when the shuttle pilot announced they were breaking atmosphere and heading for the Coalition heavy carrier CSN Vigilance. Rostova's jaw worked furiously, but something in Renner's unflinching stare must have given her pause. "You've just ended your career, Sergeant," she finally said, "and possibly committed treason. I hope whatever moral victory you think you've won was worth it." As she stalked back toward the cockpit, Renner allowed himself to breathe. The Koranian child had stopped trembling and was now watching him with those inscrutable compound eyes. Unconsciously, his grip had become protective rather than restraining. Through the porthole, Renner watched as Koros V receded, its surface now punctuated by brilliant flashes of bombardment. Another world lost, another retreat. But as he looked down at the small alien life he'd impulsively saved, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the quiet certainty that he'd done something unquestionably right. The CSN Vigilance loomed like a steel cathedral against the backdrop of stars, its kilometer-long hull bristling with weapons and adorned with the scars of countless battles. As the shuttle docked, Renner knew the real fight was just beginning. The moment the shuttle docked with the Vigilance, everything happened with the ruthless efficiency of military protocol. Renner and the Koranian child were immediately separated from the other evacuees and escorted by a squad of armed Marines to a secure medical isolation chamber deep within the carrier's belly. The child, terrified by the rough handling of the Marines, kept reaching toward Renner with its small limbs, making distressed clicking sounds that cut through him like physical pain. "Stand down, Sergeant," Commander Dmitry Volkov said as Renner attempted to follow the medical technicians taking the child away. The intelligence officer's voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute authority. "The specimen needs to be examined for pathogens and potential bioweapons." "It's a child," Renner insisted, his muscles tensed against the restraining grip of two Marines. "Not a specimen. And it's terrified." Volkov's thin lips curved in a smile that never touched his eyes. "Your concern for the enemy's offspring is noted, Sergeant. However, coalition protocol is clear. The creature will be examined, studied, and potentially utilized for intelligence purposes." "Utilized?" The word hit Renner like a physical blow. "Sir, with respect, we're talking about a non-combatant miner. The humanitarian protocols are superseded by Directive 7 Alpha in cases of potential intelligence value," Volkov interrupted smoothly. "Captain Rostova has already filed her report on your unorthodox extraction. You should be concerned with your own situation, Sergeant." From the adjacent room, the child distress calls grew louder and more frantic. Something in Renner snapped. "Commander, that child hasn't eaten, is likely dehydrated, and is in severe psychological distress," he said, lowering his voice to a deadly calm. "It's been orphaned and traumatized, and right now, for whatever reason, I'm the only thing it recognizes as safe. If you want it to survive long enough for your examination, you need me in there." Volkov studied him for a long moment, his calculating gaze dissecting Renner's motives. Finally, he nodded to the Marines. "Very well. You will assist in stabilizing the specimen. But understand this, Sergeant Renner, you are on the thinnest of ice. One step out of line, and you'll find yourself in the brig awaiting court-martial for multiple violations of coalition war doctrine." The isolation chamber was cold and sterile, bathed in harsh white light that reflected off metal surfaces. The medical technicians had managed to restrain the child on an examination table, its small limbs secured with padded restraints while various scanners hummed and beeped around it. The child's normally iridescent exoskeleton had dulled to a sickly gray, and its breathing was rapid and shallow. Renner approached slowly, deliberately placing himself in the child's line of sight. The compound eyes fixed on him immediately, and the frantic movements subsided slightly. "It's recognizing you," one of the technicians noted with surprise. "That's unusual. Kiranians typically can't distinguish between individual humans." "This one can," Renner said quietly. "May I?" After a hesitant nod from the lead technician, he moved closer and gently placed a hand near the child's restraints, not touching yet, but present. The child's trembling eased further. "What do you need to keep it alive and healthy?" Renner asked, not taking his eyes off the small alien. The technicians exchanged glances before one spoke up. "We don't have much data on Kiranian physiology, especially juveniles. They're an intensely private species when it comes to their young. But based on what we know, they need higher humidity, slightly lower oxygen content, and temperatures about 5 degrees cooler than human comfort level. Their digestive systems can process most protein sources, but they need certain mineral supplements." Renner nodded. "Make those adjustments and remove the restraints." "Sergeant, protocol. I'll take full responsibility," Renner cut in. "But those restraints are causing distress, which is compromising your readings and potentially harming the subject. Remove them, and I guarantee it will be more cooperative." After another moment of hesitation, the technician complied. As soon as the restraints were released, the child curled into a defensive ball, but didn't attempt to flee. Slowly, Renner moved his hand closer, palm up in a universal gesture of peace. "It's okay," he murmured, knowing the words meant nothing, but hoping the tone conveyed his intent. "I know you're scared. I would be too." To everyone's surprise, the child uncurled slightly and reached out one small limb to touch Renner's hand. The contact was feather-light, the alien skin cool and smooth against his calloused palm. "Remarkable," the technician whispered. "It's imprinted on you." Over the next 48 hours, Renner refused to leave the isolation chamber despite Volkov's insistence that he report for debriefing. He slept in short bursts on a medical cot they brought in, always keeping the child, whom he'd started calling Xyler, after the Kiranian word for survivor he'd picked up during the war, within sight. Slowly, painfully, they established a rudimentary form of communication. Xyler learned that certain gestures meant food or water, and Renner learned to recognize the subtle shifts in color along Xyler's still-developing exoskeleton that indicated fear, distress, or the closest thing to contentment the orphan child could manage. On the third day, as Renner dozed lightly on his cot, his personal comm unit, separate from the military channel, gave a soft, almost imperceptible ping. Instantly alert, he glanced around the chamber. The only technician present was absorbed in data analysis across the room. Xyler was sleeping in a nest-like structure they'd created from soft medical fabrics. Renner quietly activated the comm, surprised to find it functioning at all. The Vigilance's security protocols should have disabled all non-military communications. The message that scrolled across the small screen froze the blood in his veins. "Human who holds the hatchling, you have taken something of mine. Return it, and perhaps you will live. Keep it, and I will tear your world apart piece by piece until I find you both." Matriarch Vylara, Kiranian Hive Command. Renner's mind raced. Vylara was no ordinary Kiranian commander. She was a legend, a nightmare that coalition soldiers whispered about in their bunks. a tactical genius responsible for some of humanity's most devastating defeats. And somehow, impossibly, she had breached the Vigilance's communication security to reach him directly, which could only mean one thing: Xylar was her child. He quickly erased the message, his eyes darting to the sleeping form across the room. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead as the implications crashed over him. He hadn't just rescued any Kyranian orphan. He'd taken the offspring of one of the most powerful and feared enemy commanders in the war. Before he could process this new information, the chamber door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Commander Volkov entered, flanked by 2 intelligence officers. His thin smile was more predatory than ever. "Sergeant Renner," he said smoothly, "I believe it's time we had a proper conversation about your new pet." The way Volkov's eyes slid to the sleeping Xylar sent a chill down Renner's spine. Whatever was coming, he knew with bone-deep certainty that it would put Xylar in grave danger. And despite every rational thought screaming that this was the enemy's child, that Vylara was responsible for countless human deaths, Renner felt his protective instincts surge. He made a choice on Koros V, and with the weight of 2 civilizations potentially bearing down on him, he prepared to make another. Commander Volkov's office was a stark contrast to the utilitarian design of the rest of the Vigilance. Dark wood paneling, actual paper books, and what appeared to be genuine Earth artifacts gave it the air of an old-world study rather than a military command center. It was designed to intimidate through ostentatious display of privilege and power, and Renner had to admit it was effective. "Please sit." Volkov gestured to a chair across from his imposing desk. He remained standing, hands clasped behind his back as he studied Renner with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a lab specimen. "You've put us in quite the situation, Sergeant." Renner kept his face carefully neutral. "Sir, our xenobiologists have completed their initial analysis of your little rescue." Volkov's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "The genetic markers are quite distinctive, apparently. The child belongs to the royal brood. Specifically, it appears to be the offspring of matriarch Vylara herself." Though Renner had already suspected this from the message, having it confirmed sent a fresh wave of tension through his body. He maintained his composure, however, offering only a slight widening of the eyes. "I see," he said carefully. "I wasn't aware of that when I retrieved the child from Koros V." "Of course not," Volkov agreed with false magnanimity. "You were simply following your humanitarian instincts." The word dripped with contempt. "But now we find ourselves with an unprecedented opportunity." He moved to a holographic display unit and activated it. A 3-dimensional image of a Kyranian battlecruiser appeared, rotating slowly. "The Matriarch's flagship, the Serrated Edge," Volkov explained. "Currently operating in the Cygnus sector, approximately 3 light-years from our position. Our intelligence suggests she's personally commanding a major offensive there." Renner's stomach tightened. "You intend to use Xylar as bait?" "Xylar?" Volkov's eyebrow raised. "You've named it. How quaint." He deactivated the hologram and turned back to Renner. "But yes, essentially, the offspring provides us with leverage we've never had before. Kyranians, particularly those of royal lineage, are pathologically protective of their young. It's a biological imperative, not a choice. With respect, sir, using a child as a hostage violates at least 17 articles of the Coalition's own charter." "This is war, Sergeant," Volkov countered coldly. "And this particular child could be the key to ending it. Imagine capturing Vylara herself, accessing the tactical knowledge in her mind. We could save millions of human lives." Renner knew this moment required extreme caution. If he appeared too protective of Xylar, too resistant to using the child as a tactical asset, he'd be removed from the equation entirely. He needed to play along, at least enough to stay close to Xylar. "What role would I play in this operation?" he asked, injecting a note of professional curiosity into his voice. Volkov seemed pleased by the question. "The creature has bonded with you, for reasons our xenopsychologists are still debating. This makes you uniquely valuable. You'll communicate with Vylara, arrange a meeting for the exchange, and deliver the offspring to a location of our choosing." His smile widened fractionally. Where, of course, we'll have arranged an appropriate welcome for the matriarch. And if I refuse, then you'll be charged with treason. The creature will be assigned to our research division for invasive study, and we'll proceed with a modified plan. Volkov's voice had dropped to an almost gentle register that somehow made the threat more terrifying. Your participation makes things cleaner, Sergeant, for everyone involved. Renner knew he had no real choice. Not if he wanted to keep Xyler safe and maintain any ability to influence what happened next. He nodded slowly. I'll need details on the proposed exchange and guarantees of the child's safety throughout. Of course, Volkov agreed smoothly. You'll receive a properly secured communication device. The message to Vylara will be carefully crafted by our psychological warfare team. You'll simply need to deliver it. As Renner was escorted back to the isolation chamber, his mind was already racing through possibilities, contingencies, escape routes. What he was contemplating would make him a traitor to humanity by any conventional definition. But as he entered the chamber and saw Xyler's exoskeleton brighten at his return, he realized that conventional definitions no longer seemed to apply. The secure communication device Volkov provided was, as expected, heavily monitored. Every message Renner sent to Vylara would be screened, analyzed, and approved by intelligence before transmission. The responses would be similarly scrutinized. It was a carefully controlled channel designed to manipulate both Renner and the Kyranian matriarch. But Renner still had his personal comm unit, the one that had somehow received Vylara's original message. He kept it hidden, waiting for the right moment. For the next 3 days, he played his role. He sent the approved messages to Vylara, arranging a meeting at an abandoned space station in the Taurus Drift, a notorious region of asteroids and debris where tracking was difficult. The messages were cold, professional, making it clear that the child's safety depended on Vylara coming alone, without her fleet. Her responses were equally measured, agreeing to the terms while containing subtle threats that made even Volkov's analysts uneasy. Reading between the lines, Renner sensed a razor-sharp intellect and a depth of fury that made the human commanders seem like amateurs in comparison. Vylara was playing along too, but there was no doubt in his mind that she had plans of her own. On the 4th night, when a night shift technician stepped out for their usual coffee break, Renner seized his chance. He activated his personal comm and quickly typed, "Trap set. Volkov plans capture, not exchange. Station rigged. Alternative rendezvous. Delto's abandoned mining facility, secondary moon. 2200 hours standard. No coalition involvement. Child safe with me. Will bring alone." He sent it and immediately deleted all evidence of the transmission, his heart hammering in his chest. If Volkov discovered this betrayal, both he and Xyler would be finished. The next morning, Renner was summoned to a final briefing. The operation was set for the following day. A coalition special forces team would be hidden throughout the station, with orders to capture Vylara alive if possible, but to eliminate her if necessary. Renner would bring Xyler, make the exchange, and then immediately withdraw to a secure area once the trap was sprung. "Remember, Sergeant," Volkov said as the briefing concluded, "the success of this operation depends on your performance. The matriarch must believe you are acting independently until the last possible moment." "I understand, sir," Renner replied evenly. "I won't let you down." That night, as the vigilance hummed around him, Renner made his final preparations. He had spent days memorizing the carrier's systems, schedules, and security protocols. As a decorated Special Forces sergeant, he had access to areas that most crew members didn't and knowledge of tactics that might just give him an edge. He waited until the deepest part of the night cycle, when the skeleton crew was at its minimum staffing. Then, moving with practiced stealth, he woke Xyler gently. "We're leaving," he whispered, helping the child into a small, insulated carrier he'd modified for medical equipment. "Stay quiet, okay?" Xyler, who had grown remarkably attuned to Renner's moods, made a soft clicking sound of acknowledgement and curled inside the carrier. Renner secured it to his back and moved to the door. The first part of his plan relied on timing and knowledge of the Vigilance's security rotation. He slipped through maintenance corridors and service tunnels, avoiding the main passageways where cameras and patrols were concentrated. Years of infiltration missions behind enemy lines had honed his ability to move unseen, to become a ghost in the machine. His destination was the auxiliary hangar bay, where smaller craft were kept for reconnaissance and special operations. Unlike the main hangar, it operated with minimal crew during night cycle, just 2 technicians and a single security officer, according to the schedule. When he reached the access corridor to the hangar, Renner paused to check the carrier. Xyler was still quiet, though he could feel a slight trembling through the material. He placed a reassuring hand on the carrier before proceeding. The security officer was stationed at the main entrance, as expected. Renner took a different approach, accessing an environmental control panel and triggering a minor atmospheric regulation fault in a corridor on the opposite side of the hangar. When the alert sounded, the officer moved to investigate, as per protocol. Renner slipped inside, staying low and using the shadows cast by the scout ships and maintenance equipment. The 2 technicians were at the far end of the hangar, running diagnostics on a damaged fighter. Neither looked up as he moved silently toward his target. A Sparrowhawk scout ship, small enough to be operated by a single pilot, but with enough range to reach the Deltos system. Getting aboard was the easy part. The challenge would come when he attempted to launch. Even with his security clearance, an unauthorized departure would trigger immediate lockdown protocols. He would have seconds at most before the Vigilance's defense systems targeted him. Once inside the Sparrowhawk, Renner secured Xyler in the co-pilot seat and quickly began the pre-launch sequence, overriding safety protocols and bypassing the standard authorization requirements. His fingers flew over the controls with practiced efficiency, each movement precise and deliberate. Just as he finished, alarms began to blare throughout the hangar. They discovered his absence from the isolation chamber sooner than expected. No time for subtlety now. Renner fired up the engines and released the docking clamps. The Sparrowhawk's systems protested the irregular launch procedure, but he overrode them, pushing the craft toward the hangar's atmospheric containment field. "Hold on," he muttered to Xyler, then punched the thrusters to maximum. The Sparrowhawk shot forward, bursting through the containment field in a shower of energy that momentarily disrupted the ship's systems. Behind them, the vacuum emergency protocols slammed heavy doors shut, protecting the technicians but also buying Renner precious seconds. The void of space opened before them, the stars cold and distant. Renner executed a series of evasive maneuvers, anticipating the Vigilance's defensive response. Sure enough, warning shots from the carrier's point defense cannon streaked past the Sparrowhawk's hull. Unauthorized departure, Scout Vessel 617, came the immediate communication. "Return to hangar bay immediately, or you'll be fired upon. This is your only warning." Renner didn't bother responding. Instead, he pushed the small craft to its limits, calculating the jump to hyperspace even as he wove between the increasingly accurate defensive fire. The last thing he saw before the Sparrowhawk disappeared into the swirling tunnel of hyperspace was the massive bulk of the Vigilance growing smaller behind them, its weapons blazing in impotent fury. He had just burned his last bridge with humanity. There was no going back now. Beside him, Xyler emerged from the carrier, compound eyes reflecting the surreal light of hyperspace. The child made a soft, trilling sound that somehow conveyed a question. "Yeah," Renner answered, unsure if Xyler understood, but needing to speak the words aloud. "We're going to meet your mother." The Deltos mining facility hung like a broken tooth in orbit around a barren moon, its once bustling corridors now silent and dark save for emergency lighting that flickered erratically after years of neglect. Renner docked the Sparrowhawk with practiced precision, the magnetic clamps engaging with a dull thud that echoed through the small craft's hull. He checked the time, 21:47 standard. They were early, which was according to plan. He needed to survey the meeting location, ensure it wasn't another trap, and prepare fallback positions if things went wrong. Xyler had been remarkably calm throughout the journey, watching Renner with those inscrutable compound eyes that somehow managed to convey trust despite their alien nature. Now, as Renner prepared to exit the ship, the child seemed to sense the tension in his movements. "We're here to meet your mother," Renner explained, kneeling to eye level with Xyler. He'd taken to speaking to the child normally, despite the language barrier. "But I need to make sure it's safe first. Can you stay here? Just for a little while?" He mimicked the staying gesture they developed over the past days, placing his palm flat against the pilot's seat. Xyler made a low clicking sound and settled back, the muted iridescence of the developing exoskeleton shifting to a calmer blue-green. "Good," Renner said softly. "I'll be back soon. Promise." He sealed the Sparrowhawk, ensuring its life support and security systems were active, then made his way into the abandoned facility. His rifle was at the ready, years of combat instincts impossible to suppress even while arranging what was essentially a peaceful exchange. The mining station was eerily silent. The only sounds the distant creaking of metal expanding and contracting in the changing temperatures of space and the soft hum of the minimal emergency systems still functioning. Renner moved like a ghost through the corridors, checking sight lines and potential ambush points, marking escape routes in his mental map. He chose the central processing chamber for the meeting, a large, circular room with multiple exits and a high ceiling. It offered visibility and mobility, crucial factors if diplomacy failed. He was under no illusions about the danger of this encounter. Vylara might simply kill him and take Xyler, regardless of his role in saving the child. At precisely 21:55, Renner returned to the Sparrowhawk and gently collected Xyler, who had remained dutifully in place. Together, they made their way back to the processing chamber, Xyler now walking beside him, one small hand gripping the fabric of his pants leg. The minutes ticked by in silence. 2200 hours came and went. Renner's tension mounted with each passing moment, his trained senses hyper-aware of every shadow and sound. At 22:07, the faintest vibration trembled through the deck plating beneath their feet. Renner immediately dropped to a defensive crouch, positioning himself between Xyler and the main entrance. His rifle came up automatically, years of combat training overriding everything else. "Stay behind me," he murmured to Xyler, who pressed close to his back, small limbs gripping his tactical vest. The vibration intensified, and then abruptly ceased. A perfect silence fell over the chamber, so complete it seemed to press against Renner's eardrums. Then, from the shadows of the far entrance, a figure emerged. Renner had seen Kyranians before, had fought them on a dozen worlds, had killed more than he cared to remember. But Matriarch Vylara was like no Kyranian he had ever encountered. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her exoskeleton a deep, iridescent blue that shifted to purple and black as she moved. Unlike the standard warrior caste with their bulky forms optimized for combat, her body was sleek and elegant, almost regal in its proportions. The compound eyes that dominated her face were a brilliant gold, catching the emergency lighting and seeming to glow from within. Where most Kyranians wore functional armor or environmental suits, she was draped in a garment that resembled flowing robes, inlaid with what appeared to be ceremonial markings or script. Most striking of all was the complete absence of fear or hesitation in her movements. She entered the chamber as if she owned it, as if she owned the very space around her. "Sergeant Alexander Renner," she said, her voice a rich, multi-tone vibration that somehow perfectly formed human words despite the alien physiology. "Coalition Special Forces, decorated for valor on New Eden, Proxima Centauri, and Tau Ceti, a warrior of considerable reputation." Renner kept his rifle raised, but didn't immediately fire. The fact that she knew not just his name, but his service record was unsettling, to say the least. "Matriarch Vylara," he responded, trying to keep his voice steady. "You came alone, as agreed." Her head tilted slightly, an unsettlingly human gesture. "As did you." A surprise, given your species' propensity for deception. From behind Renner, Xyler made a high trilling sound. The change in Vylara was immediate and dramatic. Her entire posture shifted, the predatory stillness replaced by an alertness that reminded Renner of nothing so much as a human mother spotting her child in a crowd. "My hatchling," she said, and the complex harmonics of her voice conveyed emotions that transcended species barriers. Relief, joy, fierce protectiveness. Renner slowly lowered his rifle and stepped slightly to the side, allowing Xyler to move forward if desired. The child hesitated, looking up at Renner as if seeking permission or reassurance. "It's okay," he said softly. "That's your mother." Xyler took a tentative step forward, then another. Vylara knelt, extending her upper limbs in what was clearly a welcoming gesture. After a moment's hesitation, Xyler broke into a scuttling run, crossing the space between them in seconds and practically leaping into Vylara's embrace. The reunion that followed was intensely private, communicated in clicks, trills, and subtle color shifts across their exoskeletons that Renner couldn't begin to interpret. He averted his eyes, feeling suddenly like an intruder. When he looked back, Vylara had risen to her full height again, Xyler now nestled securely against her body in a way that somehow reminded Renner of how human parents carried sleeping children. "You saved my offspring," Vylara stated, her golden gaze fixed on Renner with uncomfortable intensity. "When your own kind would have left it to die. When your military commanders would have used it as a weapon against me." What? It was the question Renner had been asking himself since Koros V. The answer still wasn't entirely clear to him. "Because it was right," he finally said. "Because Xyler is a child. Not a soldier, not a bargaining chip. Just a child who deserved a chance to live." Vylara was silent for a long moment, studying him with those alien eyes that somehow seemed to see straight through to his core. "A simple answer," she eventually said, "yet I sensed truth in it." She shifted, adjusting Xyler's position. "You have earned a debt, Sergeant Alexander Renner. Among my people, such debts are sacred matters." Before Renner could respond, a shrill alarm suddenly blared throughout the facility. Red emergency lights began to pulse in a pattern that could only mean one thing: proximity alert. Someone else had arrived. Renner's comm unit crackled to life, a secure channel he hadn't expected to still function. "I'm disappointed, Sergeant," Commander Volkov's voice slithered through the static. "Did you really think we wouldn't track the Sparrowhawk? That we wouldn't have contingencies for your betrayal?" At the same moment, Vylara's head snapped up, her attention directed elsewhere. "Warlord Kthar's ships," she hissed. "They must have followed my vessel." Renner cursed. "We need to move. Now." "Agreed," Vylara said, already heading toward one of the side exits. "My ship is docked at the auxiliary port on the eastern quadrant." They moved rapidly through the corridors, an unlikely alliance born of immediate necessity. Renner took point, rifle at the ready, while Vylara followed with Xyler securely held against her. The sound of boots on metal grating echoed from multiple directions, coalition forces closing in. "This way," Renner directed, taking a maintenance shaft that avoided the main corridors. "We can circle around to the east quadrant without." His words were cut short as plasma fire scorched the wall next to his head. Down the corridor, a squad of Coalition Marines had spotted them. At the same moment, the distinctive high-pitched whine of Kiranian weapons sounded from an intersecting passageway. Trapped between them, Vylara observed, her voice unervingly calm given the circumstances. Renner made a split-second decision. "Cover me," he said, handing Vylara his sidearm before she could object. Then he darted forward, using the irregular architecture of the mining facility as cover. The Coalition Marines were advancing in standard formation, training Renner knew intimately. He used that knowledge against them, timing his movements to exploit the gaps in their coverage. When he was close enough, he triggered a flashbang grenade from his tactical vest and threw it precisely between them. The disorientation that followed gave him the seconds he needed. With brutally efficient movements, Renner engaged the Marines hand-to-hand, using their temporary blindness and the close quarters to neutralize their weapons advantage. He wasn't trying to kill them. These were men and women following orders, just as he had once done. Instead, he incapacitated them with precise strikes to vulnerable points, moves designed to disable rather than destroy. When the last Marine crumpled to the floor, Renner retrieved a second rifle and several grenades before returning to Vylara, who had been providing covering fire with remarkable accuracy for someone unfamiliar with human weapons. "Impressive," she commented, returning his sidearm. You fight with unexpected restraint. They're just soldiers, Renner replied, breathing heavily. Following orders. The sound of Kiranian weapons grew closer. Vylara's head turned toward it, her posture tensing. Kthar's elite guard, she said. They will not show similar restraint. They continued their tense progress toward the east quadrant, forced to detour several times as they encountered more coalition and Kiranian forces. It became clear that both Volkov and Kthar had brought significant numbers, and both seemed intent on capturing or killing them. Why is Kthar here? Renner asked as they paused in a storage chamber to reassess their route. You're both Kiranian military leadership. Shouldn't he be supporting your retrieval of Xylar? Vylara's compound eyes shifted toward him, the gold darkening slightly. Politics exists in all species, Sergeant Renner. Kthar leads the war faction. He sees this conflict as necessary, permanent. I have begun to question that assumption. You want peace. Renner couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. I want survival, she corrected. For my people, for my offspring. This war consumes resources, lives, futures. Kthar sees my pragmatism as weakness. The fact that I came alone to retrieve my offspring rather than with a battle fleet proves it to him. Their conversation was cut short by a massive explosion that shook the entire facility. Emergency klaxons wailed as decompression warnings flashed along the walls. They're destroying the station, Renner realized. Both sides. They'd rather eliminate us both than let us escape. Vylara made a sound that might have been the Kiranian equivalent of grim laughter. Common purpose at last. They redoubled their pace, racing against time as the facility began to come apart around them. The eastern quadrant was only 2 sections away when they encountered the heaviest resistance yet, a full squad of Kiranian warriors blocking the direct path to the docking port. Unlike the coalition forces, these would not be easily subdued. Kiranian warrior caste were bred and augmented for combat, their exoskeletons reinforced and their natural weapons enhanced with biotechnology. Behind them, Renner glimpsed the imposing figure of what could only be Warlord Kthar, larger and more heavily armored than even the elite guards, with an exoskeleton the deep red of spilled blood. Traitor, Kthar's voice boomed, the translator rendering it in harsh, guttural tones. Consorting with the human enemy, betraying your hive for sentiment. Vylara's posture changed subtly, her free hand moving to a concealed weapon at her side. Find another route, she said quietly to Renner. I will engage them. That's suicide, Renner protested. Even you can't take on that many alone. I don't intend to defeat them, she replied. Merely to delay them long enough for you to secure our escape. Renner stared at her in disbelief. For me to take Xylar, she interrupted, transferring the child to him with a smooth motion that brooked no argument. My ship's control systems will recognize you now. Get to the Obsidian Fong and prepare for launch. I will join you, or I will not. Before Renner could object further, Vylara pressed something into his free hand, a small device of unmistakably Kiranian design. If I fall, this contains coordinates to a safe haven. Take Xylar there. My sister queen will honor my debt. Then she was moving forward, drawing a weapon that hummed with energy as it activated. The corridor filled with the distinctive chittering battle cry of Kiranian royalty, a sound that had struck terror into countless human soldiers, but which now sent a different kind of chill down Renner's spine. With Xylar clutched securely against him, Renner reluctantly retreated, seeking an alternative path around the confrontation. The child made distressed sounds, clearly understanding that its mother was in danger. I know, Renner murmured. I don't like it either, but we have to trust her. He found a maintenance conduit that bypassed the blocked corridor, requiring a precarious climb through partially damaged infrastructure with Xylar strapped to his back. The sounds of intense combat echoed distantly through the metal walls. Energy weapons discharging, the crash of bodies, the shrill cries of the wounded. When they finally emerged onto the eastern docking quadrant, Renner's breath caught. The Obsidian Fong was not the small scout vessel he had expected. It was a sleek, predatory craft about 3 times the size of his stolen Sparrowhawk, its hull a deep black that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, marked with intricate patterns in iridescent blue that matched Vylara's exoskeleton. The boarding ramp was already extended, as if expecting them. Renner hesitated only briefly before rushing toward it, the station shuddering around them as another explosion tore through a distant section. Inside, the ship was alien but somehow intuitive, its design elegant and efficient. The control interfaces glowed with the same iridescent blue as the hull markings, and, as Vylara had promised, they responded to Renner's presence. The ship's systems activated as he approached the command chair, holographic displays flickering to life with information he couldn't read, but whose general purpose he could deduce. He secured Xyler in what appeared to be a secondary seat, using gestures to indicate the child should remain there. Then he turned his attention to the ship's sensors, trying to locate Vylara amid the chaos consuming the mining facility. The displays showed multiple life signs moving through the corridors. Coalition and Kyranian forces engaged in firefights throughout the station, seemingly now as interested in killing each other as in capturing their original targets. But one life sign in particular drew his attention, moving rapidly toward the docking bay, pursued by several others. Vylara. Renner activated what he hoped were the weapon systems, targeting the pursuers. The ship responded instantly, external cannons swiveling to track the threats. He hesitated with his finger over what appeared to be the firing mechanism. These were Kyranian warriors, Vylara's own people, but they were trying to kill her, and by extension, threatening Xyler. He fired. Precision energy bolts lanced through the station's weakened structure, cutting off the pursuers with a carefully calculated strike that collapsed the corridor behind Vylara without harming her. The matriarch burst into the docking bay moments later, moving with astonishing speed despite visible injuries. A gash across her torso leaked a luminescent fluid that pulsed with each rapid breath. Renner lowered the ramp again, standing ready with his rifle to provide covering fire as she sprinted the final distance to the ship. Just as she reached the halfway point, a massive armored figure smashed through a side barrier. Warlord Cthar, his red exoskeleton now scored with combat damage, but his strength seemingly undiminished. Vylara, the warlord roared, raising a weapon that hummed with deadly energy. Renner didn't hesitate. He fired a precise burst that struck Kthar's weapon arm, causing the shot to go wide. It gave Vylara the seconds she needed to reach the ramp and lunge aboard. Renner slammed the control to close the hatch even as he shouted for her to get to the controls. Despite her injuries, Vylara moved with practiced efficiency, taking command of the ship while Renner provided covering fire through the narrowing gap of the closing ramp. The last thing he saw before it sealed completely was Kthar's face, a visage of alien rage that promised this wasn't over. The obsidian Fong disengaged from the docking clamps with a violent shudder, Vylara piloting it away from the disintegrating station with the precision of someone who had flown combat missions for decades. Behind them, the mining facility began to break apart in earnest, secondary explosions cascading through its weakened structure. As they accelerated away, multiple vessels appeared on the sensors, both Coalition and Kyranian. "They're pursuing," Renner noted, watching the displays. Vylara's hands moved across the controls in a blur of motion. Not for long. The ship suddenly lurched, and starlight stretched around them as they entered what had to be the Kyranian equivalent of hyperspace, though the visual effect was subtly different from the human technology Renner was familiar with. The pursuing ships dwindled to nothing in their wake. Only when they were safely away did Vylara slump slightly in her chair, her injuries finally demanding acknowledgement. Xyler immediately scuttled to her side, making worried sounds and touching the wound with gentle limbs. "I'll live," she assured the child in their shared language, the translator rendering it for Renner's benefit. "You need medical attention," Renner said, scanning the ship for anything resembling a first aid station. Vylara gestured toward a compartment near the rear of the bridge. "There. But first, we must discuss our situation, Sergeant Renner." her golden eyes fixed on him with that same piercing intensity. We are now both traitors to our respective civilizations. Thar will hunt me to the edges of the galaxy. Your commander Volkov will do the same to you. Renner nodded grimly. I'm aware of the consequences. Then you understand we have limited options. Vylara shifted, wincing slightly at the movement. We can attempt to find sanctuary in the neutral zones, though few places would risk harboring us both. We can separate, though that leaves each of us more vulnerable. Or, she paused, her compound eyes studying him with an expression he couldn't read. Or, Renner prompted, or we can form an alliance, she finished. More than circumstantial. A formal bond that would allow us to combine our strengths against our mutual enemies. Renner frowned. What kind of alliance? Among my people, it is called a life pact, Vylara explained. A sacred bond between warriors who choose to share a common fate. It is not undertaken lightly, nor easily broken once formed. And what would this life pact entail? Mutual protection, shared purpose, the formal recognition of you as co-guardian to Xyler. She made a subtle gesture toward the child who was still huddled against her. And access to resources and allies that would otherwise be closed to you. Renner absorbed this, aware of the weight of the moment. Why would you offer this to me? I'm human, your enemy. You ceased to be my enemy the moment you risked everything to save my offspring, Vylara replied simply. You abandoned your people, your position, your future to protect a child not of your kind. Such honor transcends species, Sergeant Renner. She straightened, seeming to gather herself despite her injury. And there's a larger purpose we might serve together. You have seen it as clearly as I have. This war is perpetuated by those who profit from it. Thar and his faction, your commander Volkov, and those like him. They have no interest in peace. But we might, Renner said quietly, understanding dawning. Indeed, we three represent something unprecedented, human and Koranian, not just coexisting, but cooperating, protecting one another. Vylara's gaze shifted to Xyler, perhaps in our small way, offering a glimpse of a different future. Renner looked at Xyler, then back to Vylara. The choice before him was momentous. To fully commit to this new path, to formally bind his fate to these aliens who days ago he would have considered mortal enemies. Yet somehow, it didn't feel like a difficult decision at all. What do I need to do? He asked. Vylara's exoskeleton shifted colors slightly, reflecting what might have been approval or satisfaction. The ritual is simple but binding. It requires an exchange of oaths and, she hesitated, a biological component that may seem unusual to you. Biological component, a genetic exchange that allows recognition at the deepest level. For my people, identity is encoded not just in mind, but in biochemistry. She made a gesture that might have been the equivalent of a shrug. It is painless, but intimate. Renner considered this. After everything he'd already done, this final step seemed almost anticlimactic. I can handle it. Vylara inclined her head. Then we will complete the pact once we reach a safe haven. For now, she gestured to her injury. Perhaps that medical assistance? As Renner moved to retrieve the Koranian medical supplies, he was struck by the surreal turn his life had taken. A week ago, he had been a coalition sergeant, fighting a war he no longer believed in. Now he was preparing to enter a sacred alliance with a Koranian matriarch, while being hunted by both their civilizations. And somehow, for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The safe haven Vylara navigated them to was a small, unmarked planetoid, tucked into an asteroid field at the edge of what humans called the Cygnus Arm. From space, it appeared barren and inhospitable, its surface a mottled gray-brown devoid of obvious settlements or technology. Only as they descended did Renner notice the concealed hangars and habitation domes cleverly disguised to blend with the natural rock formations. A refuge, Vylara explained as the obsidian Fong slipped into one of the hidden docking facilities, known only to a select few within my lineage. Neither coalition nor Koranian empire maintains any presence in this sector. Renner studied the settlement through the viewports. It wasn't large, perhaps a few dozen structures at most, but it was well established and clearly designed for long-term habitation. Your people, he asked. Some, she confirmed. Those loyal to me rather than to the empire itself. Scientists, scholars, a few warriors. But also others. Refugees from worlds destroyed by the war, beings who have rejected the binary conflict. The implications dawned on Renner gradually. You've been planning this. Not just since Koros V, but long before. You've been creating an alternative. Vylara's compound eyes shifted toward him, the gold catching the light. I have served the Empire faithfully for many cycles. I have commanded fleets, conquered worlds. But I have also seen the cost, Sergeant Renner. A war without end serves only those who profit from suffering. She gestured toward Xyler, who had fallen into an exhausted sleep in a small alcove designed for Koranian young. I want a different future for my offspring. For all offspring. The ship settled with a gentle shudder as the docking clamps engaged. Outside, figures moved efficiently around the hangar. Mostly Koranian, but Renner spotted at least 2 other species, including what appeared to be a human. They will not harm you, Vylara assured him, noting his tension. But they will be curious. A human warrior who saved a matriarch's offspring and then joined her in exile? Such tales are rare, even in our oldest histories. Renner nodded, adjusting his tactical vest out of habit. What happens now? Now, we rest and recover, she said. Then, if you still wish it, we complete the life pact. And after that, she trailed off, her gaze turning toward the stars visible through the hangar entrance. After that, we begin the more difficult work. The next few days passed in a blur of new experiences and adjustments. Renner was given quarters in one of the habitation domes, the environment carefully calibrated to human physiological needs. The other residents of the settlement maintained a respectful distance at first, watching him with varying degrees of curiosity, suspicion, or fascination. Gradually, however, barriers began to dissolve. A Koranian scientist named Tirik approached him with questions about human medicine, their conversation evolving into a broader exchange about the comparative biology of their species. A human woman, Dr. Elena Novak, formerly of the Coalition Xenobiological Research Division before she became disillusioned and defected, sought him out to hear firsthand about Xyler's rescue. What Vylara is trying to build here, Novak confided over a meal that had been carefully prepared to accommodate both human and Koranian nutritional needs. It's unprecedented. A genuine third path beyond the binary of the war. Most thought it was impossible, that the biological and cultural gaps were too vast. But seeing you with Xyler, hearing how you've interacted with Vylara, she shook her head in wonder. Maybe there's hope after all. Throughout it all, Xyler remained close to both Renner and Vylara, seemingly comfortable in this unique arrangement that defied all conventional wisdom about human-Koranian relations. The child's exoskeleton was beginning to develop more distinct patterns, the iridescent blues and greens reminiscent of Vylara's royal coloration, but with subtle variations that were uniquely Xyler's own. On the third day, as Renner was exploring the settlement's perimeter, Vylara found him gazing out at the stark beauty of the planetoid's surface, the great gas giant. It orbited, rising majestically on the horizon. Your thoughts, Sergeant Renner? She asked, joining him at the observation point. Alex, he corrected gently. If we're going to be whatever this life pact makes us, you should probably use my first name. She inclined her head in acknowledgement. Alex, then, your thoughts? He was silent for a moment, gathering words for the complex emotions swirling within him. I'm thinking about identity, he finally said, about who we become when everything we thought defined us is stripped away. Coalition, Empire, Human, Koranian. Without those labels, who are we? Vylara made a sound that the translator didn't convert, perhaps a Koranian expression that had no human equivalent. A profound question, one that many here have struggled with. She gestured toward the settlement. When beings define themselves only in opposition to an enemy, peace becomes an existential threat. Perhaps that is why Kthar and your commander Volkov fear it so deeply. And us, Renner, Alex turned to face her directly. What are we without the war? That, she said simply, is what we are here to discover. That evening, in a chamber deep within the central habitation dome, they prepared for the life-pact ritual. A small group had gathered to witness Tirik Dr. Novak, several other residents of the settlement, and Xyler, freshly groomed and adorned with small symbolic markings that Vylara had carefully applied. The chamber was lit by bioluminescent organisms that cast a gentle blue-green glow over the proceedings. Vylara herself had changed from her practical attire to more formal robes that emphasized her status as matriarch, though the ceremonial armor that would have completed the traditional outfit was conspicuously absent, a deliberate choice, Alex suspected, to emphasize that this was an alliance of peace, not war. The Life Pact, Vylara began, her voice carrying the formal tones of ritual, is an ancient tradition among my people, born in times of greatest need, when boundaries of hive and caste required transcendence for survival. She turned to Alex. It has never before been extended to a human. Alex nodded, feeling the weight of history and expectation. He wore his military fatigues, the only clothes he had, but had removed any coalition insignia or rank markers. He was no longer Sergeant Renner of the Special Forces. He was simply Alex, a human making an unprecedented choice. The pact requires 3 elements, Vylara continued. The oath of purpose, freely given. The exchange of essence, willingly shared. And the recognition of bond, mutually acknowledged. She extended her upper limbs, palms up in a gesture of openness. Are you prepared to proceed? Alex took a deep breath and stepped forward. I am. The oath of purpose came first, a simple but profound declaration of intent. Alex spoke of his commitment to protecting Xyler, to pursuing a path beyond the binary conflict of their civilizations, to standing with Vylara against those who would perpetuate endless war for their own gain. Vylara reciprocated with a similar oath, the translator rendering her complex Koranian language into words Alex could understand, though he was beginning to recognize certain sounds and patterns even without translation. Then came the exchange of essence, the biological component Vylara had mentioned. It involved a small incision on Alex's palm, matched by a similar opening in one of Vylara's limbs. When pressed together, their blood and biochemical markers mingled, a process enhanced by a catalyst that Tirik provided. The sensation was strange, but not painful, a tingling warmth that spread up Alex's arm and throughout his body. This exchange, Vylara explained, allows recognition at the cellular level. My offspring will recognize you as kin now, as will any who share my lineage. Similarly, your biochemistry will adapt to better tolerate our environments, our nutrition. The final element, the recognition of bond, involved Xyler directly. The child approached solemnly, having been prepared for its role in the ceremony. With deliberate movements, Xyler placed one small hand on Vylara and one on Alex, forming a physical connection between them. Through this offspring, our bond is made manifest, Vylara intoned. What threatens one threatens all. What protects one protects all. 3 as one, against all harm. As the ceremony concluded, Alex felt a subtle shift in his perception. Not dramatic, but undeniable. A new awareness of Vylara and Xyler. A sense of connection that transcended the physical. Whether it was the biochemical exchange or simply the psychological impact of the ritual, he couldn't say, but felt real and significant. The gathered witnesses murmured their approval, and formal congratulations were offered. But it was the moment afterward, when the 3 of them stood alone on an observation platform overlooking the settlement, that truly cemented the reality of what they had done. So, Alex said quietly, watching Xyler explore the platform with characteristic curiosity, we're a family now. Of sorts. Of sorts, Vylara agreed, a hint of amusement in her multi-toned voice, though I suspect our respective civilizations would use less generous terms. Traitors, aberrations, deviants. Alex shrugged. I've been called worse. As have I. Vylara's gaze followed Xyler. But perhaps, someday, they will use different words. Pioneers, peacemakers, That's a long way off, Alex cautioned. Volkov and Kthar won't simply let us be. They'll keep hunting us. And they're just the visible faces of much larger factions. Indeed, which is why our work has only just begun. Vylara turned to him, her compound eyes, reflecting the starlight. We have knowledge that could severely damage their operations. Combined, our intelligence on both coalition and empire movements could expose the artificial prolongation of this conflict, the profiteering, the deliberate sabotage of peace initiatives. Alex nodded slowly, understanding dawning. You want to go public? To expose them. Strategic disclosure, she corrected, to specific allies within both power structures. There are others like us, Alex, beings who have seen through the veil of propaganda, who desire an end to this conflict but lack the means or evidence to effect change. It will be dangerous, he noted, more dangerous than simply hiding here. Yes, but necessary, if we truly mean to honor our oath of purpose. She gestured toward Xyler. What future can we offer if we merely hide while worlds burn? Alex was silent for a long moment, weighing the implications. Then he nodded decisively. Where do we start? Over the next few weeks, they began the delicate work of compiling and organizing their intelligence. Alex contributed detailed knowledge of coalition military protocols, encryption methods, and a command structure of the intelligence apparatus that Volkov represented. Vylara provided equally valuable insights into the Kyranian Empire's operations, particularly the faction loyal to Warlord Kthar that had been systematically sabotaging peace overtures for generations. Together, they identified potential allies, high-ranking officials in both civilizations who had shown signs of war weariness or skepticism about the official narratives. Dr. Novak proved invaluable, using her scientific contacts to establish secure communication channels that bypass standard military networks. Their first major success came when they managed to intercept communications revealing a planned false flag operation. Kthar's forces were preparing to attack a Kyranian colony while disguised as coalition forces, an atrocity designed to inflame Kyranian sentiment against humans and justify a major offensive. By carefully leaking this intelligence to a Kyranian submatriarch known to be at odds with Kthar politically, they managed to force the operation's cancellation. It was a small victory, but significant, the first tangible result of their unlikely alliance. There were setbacks, too. A coalition admiral who had seemed receptive to their overtures turned out to be working directly for Volkov, resulting in a near miss when a stealth team was dispatched to their previous location. Only Vylara's paranoid security protocols had saved them, necessitating a rapid relocation of the entire settlement to a backup site deeper in the asteroid field. Through it all, their unusual family unit grew stronger. Alex found himself adapting to Kyranian customs and biological rhythms with surprising ease, perhaps aided by the biochemical changes from the Life Pact. He learned to read Xyler's color shifts and vocalizations without relying on the translator, to recognize signs of distress or contentment that would have been incomprehensible to him weeks earlier. Vylara, in turn, displayed an unexpected adaptability to human ways. She began to incorporate human gestures into her communication, to adjust her speech patterns in ways that better conveyed emotion to human ears. They developed a strange hybrid culture in their private moments, neither fully human nor fully Kyranian, but something new that incorporated elements of both. And Xyler thrived in this unprecedented environment, developing a unique perspective that seamlessly blended aspects of both civilizations. The child learned both languages, adopted both sets of social cues, and seemed to navigate the cultural divide with an ease that amazed the adult residents of the settlement. 6 months after the Life Pact ceremony, their efforts culminated in a breakthrough that would fundamentally shift the war's trajectory. Through careful analysis of both coalition and Kyranian battle records, resource allocations, and classified communications, they uncovered a pattern that had remained hidden in plain sight for decades. It's not just isolated corruption, Alex explained as they presented their findings to the settlement's leadership council. The entire conflict has been artificially sustained through a complex network of arrangements between factions on both sides. Vylara manipulated the holographic display, highlighting key data points. Weapons manufacturers, resource extraction corporations, territorial administrators, all profiting immensely from perpetual conflict while ensuring it never escalates to total war nor de-escalates to meaningful peace. The evidence was damning. Coalition defeats that conveniently occurred after military contractors had secured massive new development contracts. Kiranian retreats from strategically valuable positions that made no tactical sense but benefited specific warlords' financial interests. Assassination of peace advocates on both sides, always carefully disguised as enemy action. Most disturbing, Vylara continued, is the direct connection between Commander Volkov and Warlord Kthar. They have been in communication, coordinating their efforts to maintain the conflict while eliminating threats to their respective power bases. Murmurs rippled through the assembled council members, a mix of Kiranians, humans, and representatives from 3 other species affected by the war. The question, Alex said, bringing the focus back, is what to do with this information. A public broadcast would be dismissed as propaganda. A limited disclosure risks being buried by those implicated. Dr. Novak leaned forward. What about the Galactic Assembly? They've maintained neutrality throughout the conflict, but with evidence this compelling. Precisely our thinking, Vylara confirmed. The Assembly has the diplomatic standing and information distribution networks to ensure this cannot be simply disappeared. But reaching them securely is the challenge. Both Coalition and Empire intelligence monitor all approaches to Assembly space, which is why, Alex added, we need to make our approach through a third party, specifically the Vantion Diplomatic Corps. The plan they outlined was audacious but carefully considered. The Vantions, a species known for their strict neutrality and diplomatic integrity, maintained embassies in both Coalition and Empire space. Their diplomatic vessels enjoyed protected status under conventions that even the most hardened military commanders hesitated to violate. I have a contact, Dar, Novak revealed. Ambassador Threx. We worked together on humanitarian relief efforts before the war intensified. If anyone would be willing to risk carrying this information to the Assembly, it would be them. The Council deliberated, weighing risks against potential benefits. The danger was extreme. If discovered, not just the messengers but the entire settlement could face retaliation. Yet the opportunity to fundamentally change the course of a conflict that had consumed countless lives and resources for generations was too significant to ignore. In the end, the decision was unanimous. They would proceed. The meeting to deliver the evidence to Ambassador Threx was arranged for a neutral trading outpost in the Rigel sector. Alex and Vylara would go, while Xyler remained at the settlement under the protection of their most trusted allies. The separation would be difficult. The 3 had rarely been apart since forming their unusual bond, but the stakes demanded their personal involvement. The night before their departure, as the settlement's artificial lighting dimmed to simulate night's cycle, Alex found himself on the observation platform that had become a favorite spot for their family unit. Xyler was there, gazing up at the stars with the infinite curiosity of youth. Looking for something? Alex asked, settling beside the child. Xyler made a trilling sound that the translator rendered as the future. Alex smiled, still amazed by the profound insights that sometimes emerge from the young Kiranian. And what does it look like? Xyler's exoskeleton shifted to a thoughtful blue-green pattern. Uncertain, but possible. A good assessment. Vylara's voice came from behind them as she joined them on the platform. Uncertainty is unavoidable. Possibility is what we fight for. The 3 sat in companionable silence for a time, watching the slow dance of stars and the looming presence of the gas giant that dominated their sky. Whatever their differences in biology, psychology, or cultural background, they had found something universal in their shared purpose and connection. I want you to know, Alex said finally, addressing Xyler directly, that what we're doing, it's for you, for your future, For all the children who deserve to grow up without war. Xyler's limbs made the gesture that they had developed as their family's unique expression of acknowledgement and affection. Not purely human, not traditionally Koranian, but something new that belonged only to them. "I know," the child replied simply. "That is why I'm not afraid." The journey to the Rigel outpost was tense but uneventful. They traveled on a modified merchant vessel with false registration. Vylara's appearance, disguised with specialized pigments that dulled her royal coloration to the more common worker caste patterns. Alex, with his military-honed situational awareness, maintained constant vigilance throughout the 3-day journey. The outpost itself was a sprawling complex of interconnected habitation modules, commercial zones, and docking facilities. Built originally as a mining operation, it had evolved into one of the few truly neutral exchange points where beings from a dozen civilizations conducted business outside the constraints of their respective political boundaries. Ambassador Threx was waiting for them in a private meeting chamber far from the main concourse. A Vanteon of considerable age and standing, their crystalline exoskeleton shimmered with a subtle phosphorescence that indicated extensive diplomatic experience. Their 4 primary eyes observed Alex and Vylara with careful assessment as introductions were made. "Dr. Novak spoke highly of you both," Threx said, their voice melodious despite the translator's mechanical rendering. "Though I confess, I did not fully believe her description of your unique arrangement." "Understandable," Vylara acknowledged. "We represent something that most would consider impossible, which is precisely why the information we bring requires serious consideration," Alex added, placing a secure data crystal on the table between them. "This contains evidence of systematic collusion between power factions in both the Coalition and the Empire to perpetuate a conflict that serves their interests at the expense of billions of lives." Threx regarded the crystal with an expression that suggested they understood its significance. "You're asking me to bring this before the Galactic Assembly, to effectively accuse 2 major powers of criminal conspiracy at the highest levels." "We are asking you to present verifiable truth," Vylara corrected. "The conclusions will speak for themselves." The ambassador's crystalline limbs shifted in a gesture that the translator didn't bother to interpret, likely a Vanteon expression without direct equivalent. "I have spent 3 centuries in diplomatic service, witnessing the rise and fall of governments, the birth and death of conflicts. In all that time, I have rarely seen such potential for transformation, or such risk. We understand the danger to yourself," Alex acknowledged. The danger to me is irrelevant," Threx interrupted with unexpected sharpness. "I speak of the danger to both your civilizations. Revelations of this magnitude do not lead to orderly transitions of power. They lead to chaos, to civil conflict, to the collapse of systems that, however corrupt, maintain some form of order." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. The ambassador's words struck at the heart of doubts that both Alex and Vylara had harbored but rarely voiced aloud, that in their quest to end one conflict, they might inadvertently trigger many more. Finally, Vylara spoke. "You are right to raise these concerns. We have not made this decision lightly. But the status quo is not merely corrupt, it is actively malignant. It consumes resources, lives, and futures to feed the power of the few. The transition may indeed be chaotic, but the alternative is perpetual war. And we're not proposing anarchy," Alex added. "The evidence points to specific networks within both power structures, networks that can be isolated and removed while preserving the fundamental institutions. That's why we need the Assembly's involvement to provide a stabilizing influence during the transition." Threx's crystalline form caught the light as they considered the data crystal for what seemed an eternity. Then, with deliberate movements, they reached for it. "I will review this information personally," they said. "If it is as compelling as you suggest, I will bring it before the Assembly Council within the month. But I make no promises beyond that. That is all we can ask," Vylara acknowledged with a formal gesture of respect. As they prepared to depart, Threx fixed them with all 4 eyes. "Whatever comes of this, You two represent something I had thought impossible. Genuine cooperation across the deepest divide in known space. That alone gives me hope that whatever chaos may follow, something better might emerge from it. They left the meeting with cautious optimism, aware that they had set in motion events that could not easily be reversed. The journey back to their vessel was undertaken with the same careful security measures they had employed on arrival. Alternate routes, visual scans for surveillance, periodic communication blackouts to avoid tracking. They were halfway back to their docking bay when Alex's instinct flared. A subtle shift in the crowd's movement, a too casual glance from a maintenance worker, the sudden absence of noise from a normally busy side corridor. "We're being tracked," he murmured to Vylara, not breaking stride. She gave no visible reaction, but he sensed her immediate shift to combat readiness through their life-pack bond. "How many?" "At least 3 that I've spotted. Probably more. Coalition or Empire?" Alex studied the flow of beings around them, picking out the telltale signs of professional hunters trying to blend with civilian movements. "Both, I think. Working separately." A grim satisfaction colored Vylara's response. "So Volkov and Kthar still don't fully trust each other. That gives us an advantage." They increased their pace slightly, heading for a busier commercial section where the density of the crowd might provide cover. Alex's hand stayed close to the concealed weapon at his side, while Vylara's posture shifted subtly to allow faster access to the natural weapons of her species. The attack, when it came, was both more sudden and more brutal than they had anticipated. A localized EMP burst disabled communications and most electronic systems in their immediate vicinity, plunging a section of corridor into dim emergency lighting. Civilians scattered in panic as armed figures converged from multiple directions. Coalition special forces from one end, Karanian death commandos from the other. "Split up," Vylara hissed. "Rendezvous at contingency point." There was no time for further discussion. They separated, each drawing fire away from the other and from the civilians caught in the crossfire. Alex dove into a maintenance passage, engaging the coalition forces with the precision of someone intimately familiar with their tactics. Vylara went high, using her species' natural climbing abilities to attack from the ceiling infrastructure. The battle was short but devastating. Both Alex and Vylara fought with the desperate efficiency of those protecting not just themselves, but everything they had built together. The Coalition and Empire forces, not coordinating with each other, occasionally fired upon their supposed allies in the confusion. Alex took a grazing hit to his shoulder, but managed to neutralize 3 attackers before breaking free into a secondary corridor. Vylara suffered damage to one limb, but moved with the uncompromising lethality of a matriarch defending her interests. They reconnected at their preset contingency point, a service area near the outpost's environmental systems. Both were wounded but mobile, their breathing heavy from exertion and adrenaline. "Our vessel will be compromised," Vylara stated, her compound eyes scanning the exits. "We need alternative transport." Alex nodded grimly. "And we need to warn the settlement immediately. If they found us here," the implication hung between them. If their location had been discovered, the settlement itself might be at risk. Xyler might be at risk. With renewed urgency, they forced their way into a communication node, overpowering the lone technician and using the emergency systems to transmit a coded warning to their allies. The message was brief, but would trigger the settlement's evacuation protocols, ensuring that Xyler and the others would relocate to their deepest backup site. Securing alternate transportation proved more challenging. The outpost was now on high alert, with security forces converging on their last known position. Coalition and Empire representatives were demanding cooperation from the outpost administration, their usual rivalry temporarily set aside in pursuit of the traitors who threatened both. In the end, they escaped aboard a waste reclamation vessel, a massive, ungainly ship that collected and processed refuse from the outpost for recycling. Hidden among forgotten cargo containers, they endured a punishing 18-hour journey to the vessel's next port of call, a resource extraction colony with minimal military presence. From there, using identities and resources established for exactly such emergencies, they acquired a small but fast courier ship. The journey back to the settlement was made in tense silence. Both of them focused on a single, overwhelming concern. Had Xyler and the others escaped in time? They approached the planetoid with extreme caution, sensors at maximum sensitivity. What they found confirmed their worst fears. The settlement had been attacked. Smoke still rose from several of the habitat domes, and debris scattered the landing zones. "Life signs," Vylara demanded, her voice tight with an emotion that transcended species barriers. Alex studied the scanner readings with intensity. Minimal activity. Either they evacuated as planned, or he couldn't finish the sentence. The bond between them, forged in a life pact and strengthened through months of shared purpose, thrummed with shared anxiety. They landed at the far edge of the settlement, approaching on foot with weapons ready. The destruction was extensive but showed signs of having been interrupted. Half-completed demolition, abandoned equipment, search patterns left unfinished. Most telling was the absence of bodies. No residents, no attackers. "They got out," Alex stated with growing confidence as they examined the command center. "The primary systems were wiped clean using the protocol we established. And look, the emergency transport logs show full evacuation approximately 2 hours after our warning message." Vylara's posture relaxed fractionally. They would have taken the subterranean route to the backup vessels. If they maintained communication silence as instructed, they should reach the secondary haven within 12 hours. A faint sound from outside froze them both. Moving with practiced coordination, they positioned themselves on either side of the entrance, weapons ready. The figure that appeared in the doorway was neither Coalition nor Koranian, but Vantian, the unmistakable crystalline form of Ambassador Threx, moving with deliberate care through the ruins. "I calculated you would return here," Threx stated without preamble. Despite the obvious risk, Alex kept his weapon trained on the ambassador. "You led them to us." "I did not," Threx countered calmly, "though I suspected you were being tracked long before you reached me. The Coalition has developed new quantum resonance monitors that can detect the biochemical signatures of life pact bonds. Your unique pairing made you easier to locate than you realized." Vylara's compound eyes narrowed. "Why are you here, Ambassador?" "Because I reviewed your evidence immediately after our meeting." Threx produced a data crystal identical to the one they had provided. "It is more compelling than even you suggested. The Assembly must see this without delay." Alex and Vylara exchanged glances, the silent communication of their bond conveying shared skepticism. "You'll understand if we find the timing suspicious," Alex said carefully. "Entirely reasonable," Threx agreed. "But consider, if I wished you captured or eliminated, I could have simply delayed you until the forces converging on the outpost arrived in greater numbers. Instead, I am here alone, risking my diplomatic standing and possibly my life." Vylara studied the ambassador with the intense focus of her species. "What are you proposing?" "My diplomatic vessel awaits at the secondary docking facility. It can transport us directly to the Assembly's central chambers on Galactic Prime. Under diplomatic protection, you can present your evidence personally to the full council." Threx's crystalline form caught the light, fracturing it into complex patterns. "It is your best chance, perhaps your only chance, to ensure this information reaches those with the power to act upon it." The offer was both tantalizing and terrifying. Direct access to the Galactic Assembly would ensure their evidence couldn't be buried or dismissed. But leaving immediately would mean abandoning their planned rendezvous with Xyler and the others at the secondary haven. "We cannot leave without our offspring," Vylara stated, the flat tone of her voice indicating this was non-negotiable. Threx's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a Vantion expression of understanding. "The young one you share guardianship of?" "Yes, Dr. Novak mentioned this unique aspect of your bond." The ambassador seemed to consider for a moment. "There is a solution. My vessel can divert to your secondary haven, collect your offspring, and any others you designate as essential. Then proceed to Galactic Prime. That would expose the location of our people to you, Alex pointed out. Why should we trust you with that? Because, Threx replied simply, I have seen enough death. Your evidence offers the first real hope of ending a conflict that has destabilized a quarter of the galaxy for generations. Whatever risks exist in trusting me, they are outweighed by the potential benefits of success. Alex and Vylara needed no discussion to reach their decision. Their shared bond had evolved to the point where complex ethical calculations could be communicated through the subtlest of cues. After a moment of silent communion, they lowered their weapons simultaneously. We accept your offer, Ambassador, Vylara stated formally. With gratitude and caution in equal measure, Threx inclined their crystalline form in acknowledgement. A wise approach. Now, we must depart immediately. Both Coalition and Empire forces will return in greater numbers once they realize their initial assault failed to capture you or your people. As they made their way to Threx's diplomatic vessel, a sleek, iridescent craft unlike anything produced by human or Khoranian shipyards, Alex found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had led to this moment. From a desperate rescue on a dying planet to potentially reshaping the political landscape of known space, all catalyzed by the simple, instinctive act of saving a child. The diplomatic vessel accelerated away from the ruined settlement, its advanced propulsion leaving barely a trace in the void. As the stars streaked past in the peculiar visual effect of Vantion faster-than-light travel, Alex felt Vylara's presence beside him, solid, real, and somehow more familiar now than his own species. We will find Xyler, she said quietly, the private harmonics of her voice conveying what words alone could not. And together, we will build something new from the ashes of what we once were. Alex nodded, his hand briefly touching the healing wound on his shoulder. Something better, I hope. Something possible, Vylara echoed Xyler's words from days earlier. And in that moment, despite the dangers still ahead, despite the uncertain reception their revelations would receive at the Galactic Assembly, despite the fundamental restructuring of both their civilizations that might follow, Alex felt something he had not experienced since long before the war that had consumed half his life. Hope. The Vantion diplomatic vessel arced through space toward their uncertain future, carrying not just crucial evidence or political refugees, but something far more profound. The living proof that even the deepest divides could be bridged when beings chose connection over conflict, protection over destruction, and the welfare of a child over the dogmas of war.